why do I feel so empty
Mm-hmm.
inside? Like, why do I feel so miserable?
Uh-huh.
And I remember like sending a prayer up and being like, God, show me how to be joyful because I don't know how to do it.
Uh-huh. Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. A very happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I believe that the work we're doing together on this podcast is very important work, and I hope you're inspired to be a better person and cherish those close to you as a result of listening. The number one libido killer is stress. Stress is an interesting thing to think about because you really can't live without feeling stressed from time to time. It's a part of life. Or are there skills out there that will help you manage it better? One of the black belt sex tips I often teach is a concept called calm the heck down, which if you've listened to my podcast for a while, you'll see this theme popping up often. It's the ability to settle down within your own skin and be fully present in the moment. This, along with a few other skills, are essential to learning how to deeply emotionally connect with another person that you absolutely love. So I'm excited to bring on my guest today. Her name is Denita Bremmer. She is an expert in somatics, which is a fancy word for the intersection of the mind, body, and spirit. She teaches others how to listen to your body in a way that grounds and connects you so that you can reach new levels of love and intimacy in your relationships. By the end of this episode, you'll walk away with fresh ideas on how to create more safety within yourself and in your relationships, how to better metabolize stress, work through and heal a history of trauma, and how to work with your body instead of against your body as a tool to help you deeply connect with others. And of course, listen to the end for Denita's fantastic black belt sex tip. If you're looking for something really in-depth and transformative for your marriage, you don't want to miss our upcoming in-person couples retreat. The dates are March 26 through 30. During this retreat, you and your spouse will get to do a deep dive into your marriage dynamic, get real tools to help you with intimacy, and you'll draw closer together like nothing else. That's not all. We mix up with a fun and engaging atmosphere and activities at a beautiful resort, beautiful setting, and it's limited to just a small group. And as of this writing, we just have one spot left. Perhaps you'd like to take this last spot. All right, let's get into this interview with Denita. Denita, welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I am really looking forward to this episode. I think there's so much wisdom in what you have to share. Anyway, to start us off, tell me about a sudden realization you've had lately, maybe in your own marriage, maybe in your own sex life for that matter.
Yeah. So I have been the lower desire partner for my entire marriage. And recently, probably a couple months ago, I realized that I was the initiator,
Uh-huh.
which all of my research about sex and learning, high desire, low desire, all these things, I always associated initiation with the higher desire.
Mm-hmm.
So I think subconsciously, I knew I was the lower desire. And so I was like, well, I'm not the initiator.
Uh-huh.
And I think we just got to a place in our marriage where we're kind of maybe going through the motions a little bit and we're both frustrated about things for different reasons. And I don't even remember what sparked this, but I had this realization that I am actually the initiator in my marriage, not just in sex, but
Mm-hmm.
just in most areas of marriage. I am the one that says, hey, maybe we should think about this. Hey, I've been thinking about that. And I'm the one that kind of starts us down the path. For example, I wanted to buy a second house and Airbnb it.
Uh-huh.
And my husband was very resistant. And I was like, I really think we need to do this. And
Uh-huh.
so we did it. And it ended up it's a great experience. It's been a great experience. But I was the one to kind of like get it started and to really push for it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started noticing that, I was like, oh, I'm the one to usually initiate things. I started thinking about sex and I was like, ooh, this doesn't go with how I identify
Uh-huh.
myself.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so it has kind of changed how I approach sex and I think it really has just opened me up a bit.
Gotcha. So, what conclusions do you draw from that realization?
Well, first of all, that I, like, didn't consciously realize that it was possible to be the lower desire and to be the initiator.
Uh huh.
Now that I have this realization, I'm like, "Of course it's possible."
Uh huh.
But just I think we make a lot of assumptions
Hmm.
about dynamics, and so I'm trying to undo some of those assumptions that I've made in my own marriage. And also just, like, the role identity plays in my marriage and in my sex life. Like, I just never saw myself as an initiator, and now in the last few months and seeing myself, I'm, like, kinda leaning into this energy of, "Oh, I do initiate, I do start things," usually in a response to something.
Uh huh.
Um, so it's just kinda brought up some new dynamics within myself, and just I'm still exploring it, to be honest.
That's great. Identity is a powerful, powerful function for good or for ill in any marriage, too. So I'm glad you're catching on that. And speaking of assumptions, I want to hear more about your story and the assumptions you used to have that now you see things differently. How did you get into this field of somatics and helping couples improve their sex lives through somatic work?
Yeah, well, I got into somatic work just from being my first client. So
Uh
I'm
huh.
also a life coach and certified through the life coach school a million years ago, and was really intent on that, like, thought work angle.
Mm-hmm.
I bought into the idea that, like, thoughts could save us from everything.
Yes. Just so change your thoughts and you'll change your life. Uh huh.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I wanted it to be the case. I just thought if that's true, then my life is gonna get so much easier. This is, not that it's easy, but it didn't work.
Uh
It
huh.
didn't really work, right?
Uh
And
huh.
I
Uh
was
huh.
really good at thought work. And I was working with a coach actually on my business,
Mm-hmm.
working kind of in the marketing area of my business. And she was probably the first coach I worked with that was really truly trauma informed and could kind of sense things that I didn't sense. And she planted a few seeds by asking, like, "Have you ever thought about dealing with your past trauma?"
Uh huh.
Which my childhood and growing up years, I have a lot of trauma that happened during that time. And I would kind of brush her off and be like, "Well, that has nothing to do with my business."
Right.
And then one day she asked me, we were doing some, like, future me work,
Uh huh.
and she asked me, like, "When you just think about your future 5 or 10 years out, what do you see?" And I was very surprised that I saw myself speaking on a stage.
Uh huh.
But it was like the audience was all ready for me. They were silent, maybe some coughs here and there.
Uh huh.
I was on the stage, the spotlight was on me, and I felt naked. I felt like this pressure to perform, but I didn't know what to say, and I was just like, "Ugh," like my voice wouldn't come out. And when I recognized that in that coaching session, I just knew. I was like, "This is trauma.
Mm-hmm.
This is trauma, that I'm not gonna be able to thought work my way out of this because this is like a feeling in my body that consciously is not related to any thought."
Gotcha. It seems a
Right?
little irrational in the moment. Uh
Yeah.
huh.
Yeah. And so that was a big kind of aha moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty immediately I sought out a trauma coach.
Uh huh.
I'm not opposed to therapy, but I'm just kind of in the coaching world.
Right. Uh
So
huh.
I found a trauma coach, and her practice, her coaching of me was almost no mindset, no talking about what I was thinking and feeling, and almost all just being in my body, describing what's happening in my body, following urges to move certain ways. And I worked with her for about 6 months,
Mm-hmm.
and I made more personal progress in those 6 months. Like, I actually started to feel different
Uh huh.
versus the 4.5 years previous to that, that I had been doing mindset and been a coach. And it really blew my mind, right? And so I started thinking, well, if this changed me so much, then I want to learn these tools and I want to bring them to my clients. I actually don't work with couples, but I work with individuals, and any topic is available. And I do find the topic of sex weaves its way through almost all the coaching I do. I have a couple thoughts about this, but one of them is that sexuality comes online at the same time as our identity circuit in our brain. And
Mhm.
so, because identity is so important and so much at the center of everything we think and feel and do, I think sort of sexuality and self-expression and relationship, all of those themes come together in sexuality.
That's good.
So,
Great.
yeah, so that's how I got into somatic work, and the deeper I go, the more I love it,
Mhm.
and the more I gain a testimony of the effectiveness of it, so
So some people may have not even heard the word somatic, and they might be thinking something that's not. Can you clarify for us what do you mean by the somatics? Or
yeah,
uh
so soma means body.
okay,
So somatic work is just body-based work.
gotcha.
In contrast to mindset work, mindset is really focused on the thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
and what thought are you having, and what are the relationships between the thoughts and the feelings and the actions. Somatic work is really more of the sensation level or the emotion level happening in the body in that given moment, and bringing more awareness to the body and bringing the body's wisdom more to the table with the logical mind wisdom.
Gotcha.
So it's not that we want to like throw away the logical mind. We need that. And as humans, that's how we navigate the world through our thoughts. But we just want, at least my purpose as a coach with many of my clients is to understand what's happening in the body and the wisdom that the body has, bring that more to the top instead of shoving it down and ignoring it, which
Gotcha.
I think in our culture we often do.
Which doesn't make us feel safe. Can you talk more on safety and why safety is so important, especially in intimate encounters, and
Yeah.
what you've learned about somatic work in that context?
Yeah, for sure. So when I start working with someone, safety is always the first thing we work on. We can't really make any changes or gain a whole lot of awareness if their body is on high alert and doesn't feel safe.
Mhm.
So that's always the first thing. It doesn't even matter if we're talking about sex or intimate relationships or relationships in general. We need to create a baseline of safety in all of I guess my opinion is in all of self-development work, really.
Uh-huh.
Because if you're in that, like, fight or flight mode, there's a whole part of your brain that is gonna be inaccessible,
Mhm.
and probably entire parts of your body as well, right? So from, like, a nervous system point of view, we wanna get to that place where we feel kind of this calm aliveness, this place where we can kinda rest, but we're not, like, asleep, right? We can still function,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and safety is, I think, always the first step, safety between client and practitioner, which then translating into intimate relationships is safety between all the people in those relationships.
Mhm.
I just think it has to be the foundation from which we work, or else we might not be getting kind of the real full person in front of us,
Right,
right? It
right.
might be them through the lens of, I feel like I have to get away, or I feel like I have to fight, or I feel like I don't have enough resources, so I shut down,
Mhm.
right? And so it's like we want to know in our marriages, in our sex lives, we want to know that other person and who they really are and what their real intentions are. So that has to come from a place of safety. I will say that we live in a very stressed world,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
right? Just the
Yes.
context of our world. And Gabor Mate says that if you want to literally like induce trauma, you would set the same parameters that we see in Western culture. So it's an interesting conversation to have about safety when so much of our world is very stress inducing.
Mhm.
And I think what sometimes we try to do is we try to create safety from that place of stress
Mhm.
instead of following the stress response, coming out of the stress response, and then feeling into the safety. And I almost think that we do ourselves a disservice. I understand why we do it because there is so much stress in our lives, and we're just like, I just want to be able to relax. I just want to be able to feel safe, right?
Mhm.
But the way we approach it, I don't think is always
Do you
effective.
have a story about that?
Well, kind of my whole life is a story about that.
Uh-huh.
Like, basically, My growing up years, my home was not safe. There were moments of
Mhm.
safety,
Mhm.
but it was very chaotic. My parents were drug addicts and alcoholics, and I just never knew what to expect.
Mhm.
And so, especially as I got to be a teenager and an older teenager, my whole motivation in life was
Mhm.
to get away from home.
Uh-huh.
Like, get to college, create a life for myself that's different than my parents', which was very much, blue collar, paycheck to paycheck type of financial situation. It was like whatever my parents were doing, I'm gonna do the opposite.
Uh-huh.
So, they're both high school dropouts, I'm gonna graduate valedictorian.
Uh-huh.
They don't go to church, I'm gonna be, like, the most
Righteous. Uh-huh.
faithful person. Yes,
Uh-huh.
righteous person.
Mhm.
They didn't go to college, I'm gonna go to college. So everything was in relation to that, which was very much like this flight response,
Mhm.
right? So I'm trying to get to safety, I'm trying to get to safety. And really my entire life, like,
And it's a form of
mar
rebellion too, right?
it's
In
kind
a
of a
way.
form of
Uh-huh.
rebellion. I didn't see it that way at the
Uh-huh.
time. I think I saw my parents as the rebellious ones.
Right. Uh-huh.
Um, but it was very much like, I don't want a life like what they have.
Gotcha.
And so what I realized years and years later was that that's its own form of prison, right?
Mhm.
If every decision I make was, like, against what they did. And what I got caught up in was this belief that if I just lived life the quote unquote right way,
Uh-huh.
then I would feel safe. Then I would feel good. Then I would feel whole. And so I was basically just, like, running my
Uh,
whole life to the next thing, like, "Okay, gotta graduate from college. Gotta get married. Okay, maybe if I have kids," right? It was just like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, until I got to this point. There's actually a moment I remember. I
mhm.
was sitting on my dining room floor. My kids were about 7 and 4 and 2.
Uh-huh.
And I'm looking around, seeing the crumbs on the floor and, like, looking at these babies of mine and being like, "They're so awesome. They're so beautiful and strong and healthy and smart." But then contrasting that to, like, why do I feel so empty
Mhm.
inside? Like, why do I feel so miserable?
Uh-huh.
And I remember, like, sending a prayer up and being like, "God, show me how to be joyful, because I don't know how to do it."
Uh-huh.
And I think that was kind of this moment where I kinda realized, like, I have everything. I've got a great husband, I've got a home in the suburbs, we have money in the bank, our kids are healthy, like, all the boxes were checked.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I was, like, trying to get to this safe place, this calm place by, like, doing,
Uh-huh.
but it was completely out of that stress response. Like, I was just constantly, like, revved up.
Uh-huh.
And so once I started learning about the nervous system and trauma responses, it made a lot of sense to me why I was doing that and why it wasn't working.
Give us like a 2-minute tutorial on the nervous system.
Okay. So when I talk about the nervous system, the part of the nervous system we're talking about is the autonomic nervous system.
All right.
And that's the part of your nervous system that does it, like, automates all of your functions, your heart rate, your breathing, all of that.
Mhm.
The other thing it does on auto is search for dangers.
Uh-huh.
Right? So it's the part of your nervous system that we hear about fight, flight, or freeze. And
Mhm.
now there are some other Fs like fawn.
And other F words too. Uh-huh.
Other F words too. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so this is not a thought process. This is very much just your body in a split second, in a microsecond, determining based on the environment, based off of previous experiences, this is safe or this is not. Right? This
Right.
is a danger. And when we do perceive a danger, doesn't even have to be a real danger, it just has to be perceived as a danger, we go into that fight or flight mode, that activated mode.
Uh-huh.
So normal like first step is we fight. If we feel like we can't overcome the threat, then we try to run away. And if neither of those are available, then we freeze. We're kind of overcome,
Uh-huh.
right? We don't have enough resources to deal with the threat. So the freeze. The fawn is like I learned it as like a subset of the freeze,
Uh-huh.
which is if I don't have enough resources to fight or to run, then I'll befriend.
Right.
I'll befriend my threat. So
Mhm.
that's usually in relationship. We're not gonna, like, befriend a bear,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
But we do see this a little bit in the animal kingdom. Horses, usually animals that are in hierarchies,
Uh-huh.
will show some of this kind of fawning
Uh-huh.
response where they'll be like,
Deferring, probably. Uh-huh.
yes,
Mhm.
yeah. So we see a little bit of that. So that's basically what we're talking about when we're talking about the nervous system. There are actually other systems in place, but when practitioners like myself talk about the nervous system, we're really talking about this automatic part of our nerves and brain system that work together to keep us safe.
Gotcha. So is it just a matter of learning how to calm down the nervous system?
That is what people think, but the idea that we just always wanna be calm is actually kind of not quite right.
Mhm.
What we wanna do is we wanna be able to meet the threat or whatever is in our environment
Uh-huh.
properly.
Got it.
So, like, if you're out walking and you see a snake, you don't actually wanna be calm.
No.
You wanna, like, get away,
Uh-huh.
right? And so we want to be able to meet our environments, our relationships, our inner worlds even with, like, the proper responses, the appropriate response.
Gotcha.
So when I was 15,
Mhm.
my parents were fighting. They fought all the time, but
Mhm.
this is one particular instance. And I had a boyfriend at
Mhm.
the time,
Mhm.
and of course, being a 15-year-old and a teenager, I wanted to hang out with my friends and my boyfriend more than I wanted to be at home.
Uh-huh.
And so they were fighting about that, about how I didn't like to be at home and I didn't wanna do my chores, something in that realm. And my dad was really upset and he was like, "Well, she should stay home and she should do this." And my mom was kinda defending me.
Uh-huh.
And I was listening to all of this from my bedroom and, I'm 15, I'm not like a little kid anymore, and so I kinda had this inkling, like, I should go out there and I should give my point of view. And I was a little scared. My dad is a scary guy, and I don't know, something just was like, "You should go out there." So I went out into the living room, and I don't even remember exactly what I said, but I think I was like, "Well, can I give my point of view?"
Mhm.
And they both were like, "Okay." And so I said something about how I felt or what was my truth, about that situation.
Mhm.
And I had this, I would call it like a spiritual prompting,
Uh-huh.
this knowing that my dad was gonna walk across the room and try to slap me across the face,
Uh-huh.
which he had never done before.
Uh-huh.
But it was just this, like, that's what he's gonna do. Like, he's just in this state, he's very angry, and that's exactly what he tried to do, but because I knew about it, like, I just sensed it,
Uh-huh.
I stepped out of the way, and he barely like, his fingertip touched my chin.
Uh-huh.
And the reason why I say that, like, why I mentioned that story was because the threat, my dad being this
Mhm.
angry, big man,
Mhm.
like, I wouldn't have wanted to just, like, sit down and be quiet. Like, that's kinda what I did my whole childhood is I tried to stay invisible,
Uh-huh.
out of the way,
Mhm.
just, like, appease my parents. But for whatever reason, in this moment, I really felt like I need to go speak up. I need to, tell them my part of the story. And so it was like this fight. I could feel it inside of me, this energy. And at the time, I thought it was fear. I
Mhm.
really did.
Uh-huh.
But years later, after doing some somatic work and working through some trauma stuff, I realized it was power that I was feeling.
Uh-huh.
And so I was meeting this perceived threat of my dad being really upset and angry with my own power, right? And in that, like, there's also like a spiritual side of this, right? Where I felt like, and at the time I wasn't going to church, so I didn't feel particularly close to God or
Uh-huh.
anything.
Uh-huh.
But I did feel like the spirit had given me this warning. And even from the beginning, it was like, you need to go say something. And so it was like power was just flowing through me, that like this raw, almost like electricity that buzzes.
Uh-huh.
And so I met my dad, my perceived threat, with that instead of with like trying to run away or trying to befriend or be calm or whatever.
Mhm.
Right. And it worked. right? So, like, whatever I needed in that moment, this knowing came to me. I stepped back, he didn't slap me on the face, and I looked at him and very calmly,
Uh-huh.
I said, "You will never touch me again."
Uh-huh.
And he has never touched me again. I mean, I got spanked as a kid, but he never tried to, like, slap me across the face or anything like that.
Uh-huh.
And so, like, it was a very adult moment in my life where I, like, said the thing that needed to be said, and I responded in a very mature way. I wasn't, like, super emotional or, like, out of control in any way, and that is what that moment needed,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because then after that, he just stepped back, and it was like it was completely diffused. So, I guess that's an example. I also think of examples like when someone we're in relationship with maybe is being very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the inclination is to be like, "Well, you just need to do this and you need to do that," and try to, like, fix. But often what they need is for us just be there and listen
Mm-hmm.
and, like, feel with them.
Uh-huh.
This might not really fit into that, like, nervous system states, but it's the concept or the principle of, meeting the situation with what it needs
Mm-hmm.
instead of what our response is, what our default response might be.
Do you have a story of when your husband did that for you?
Yeah, I mean, as you can probably tell from my couple stories here, my growing up life was not fantastic, right?
Uh-huh.
And there have been so many times when I have been very upset or distraught over my relationships, particularly with my dad or my sisters. My mom passed away when I was 20 years old,
Mm-hmm.
where he has just not tried to fix, where he's literally just said nothing, given me a hug, let me cry, let me feel all the things. And I'll tell you, he's an engineer and he sucks at that most of the time.
He wants to fix it.
And
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
does. He wants to
He's
fix
got a
it.
mind for it. Mm-hmm.
But I think there are moments when he just knows this isn't fixable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where he has he has really let me just feel what I need to feel, say what I need to say, and just listen.
Mm-hmm.
And that, speaking of safety, that has felt really safe to me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that has, I think, developed a lot of safety in our relationship.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but on the other end of that, being a husband and stereotypically like to fix things, as I really
Yeah.
think about it, and if I really pay attention to what's going on inside my body, I'm anxious that my wife is upset.
Yeah.
And so my moves to try to fix the situation really is more about me trying to calm myself down by calming her down than it is
Mm.
about meeting what she really needs in the moment. Because sometimes
Yeah.
the solution is to fix it, but it's
Yes.
done out of that's what's needed for her, less about so that I can start feeling peace again. Because I get upset that she's upset, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And we would, in the psychology world, we would call that codependency,
Yeah, I
right?
suppose a form of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a form of codependency when we
We need you
even
to calm down so I
subconsciously.
calm down. Right.
Yep,
Uh-huh.
exactly. I
Yep.
mean, really, we usually think of codependency in the context of, like, addiction,
Mhm.
right? Where we need the addict to be a certain way so that we can feel good, which is probably true in my experience because my parents were addicts. But even to a lesser extent, when I worked with my first somatic coach, she pointed that out to me, and I was a little ruffled by it. I was like, "I am not codependent." But she kinda was like, "Well, if you're always wanting your husband to be okay and to not be upset, to not be angry, and your role, my role was to, like, assuage his emotions,
Uh-huh.
that is a version of codependency."
Yes.
Right?
Right,
And
right.
so I had to work pretty hard at, like, letting him be angry or upset, usually around a sports event.
Uh-huh.
'Cause, like, this just the air in the house when, his team isn't winning or whatever, it's, like, so tense, and I did not like to feel that way. So I like to come in and be like, "Well, that's okay, there'll be another game," or whatever I would say, right?
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And I had to, like, consciously stop doing that, and it was so uncomfortable,
Yeah.
right? It was very uncomfortable to let him just be how he was, and for me to just tend to my own experience.
Mhm.
Whew, that is some hard work there.
Yeah, it is hard work.
Yeah.
Can you give us any tips on how to metabolize stress?
Yes. So stress is an active response. It would be classified with that like fight or flight
Mhm.
in most cases.
Mhm.
And what the active response really wants and needs to come out of that active response is movement. And this was kind of when I learned this, it kind of blew my brain open because I was like, what? Because I think I was doing the opposite. When I would get stressed or activated, I would try to calm
Yeah,
myself.
clamp down more, right? Uh-huh.
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 Yeah. And so through practice, I learned that what my body really wanted was like, I need to go for a walk. I need to like run or like pace my room. Or sometimes we talk about shaking, right? It's just like this energy.
Uh-huh.
And so now when I notice that active energy, I allow myself to move. And inevitably through the movement, I kind of come down from it. I'm like, oh, okay, I feel better now. And the thing I always think about with this is if we're literally being chased by a lion, we are running, we're moving our bodies to get away from the lion and we get to safety. We climb up a tree or we get to home
Uh-huh.
where then there are people there with guns or whatever to catch the lion.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of movement involved in that. But for us, think about in our sort of life these
Yeah,
days.
you get an angry email or whatever.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
it's like an email or
Uh-huh.
something from our phones or our computers, right?
Mhm.
There's no movement involved,
Right.
right? And so we go into that stress response and our bodies are like, "Move, move, move." And we're like angrily typing.
Uh-huh.
That's like not enough movement, right? Like
Uh-huh.
we wanna move our big muscles.
Uh-huh.
So that's the biggest thing that I've learned is that the stress response wants movement. It metabolizes through movement.
Mhm.
The shutdown response, there it is still actually an active response. Typically, it's like there's a lot of activation on the inside, but
Mhm.
for whatever reason, we don't have the resources to move. So we kind of freeze it. We time out, pack it away,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So that's a little bit different, especially for somebody who's been living in like a chronic freeze response. Gentle movement like yoga or walking is fantastic. But what that really needs is like space and time,
Mhm.
and heat is an amazing resource because when we talk about the freeze response, the cells in your body literally slow down
Mhm.
and have less resources. And so they might not be frozen like ice. Like
Mhm.
sometimes that does happen. Like I have perpetually been cold most of my life.
Uh-huh.
But it's more of this idea of, like, the cells in your body are just not moving as much, and so inviting heat to infuse some energy and then just, like, whole foods and, water and things that are just, like, really good for our bodies are what that freeze response usually needs. So, I just mentioned that because oftentimes when I talk about the active response and I talk about movement, people are like, "Wait, don't forget about the freeze response." So, yeah, really movement is what we need when we're stressed.
Good. All right. So I get that we can metabolize our stress better by moving, but are there other practices we can do to kind of maintain kind of a state of calm or maybe even get used to listening to our bodies and listen to what's needed?
Mm. I love that question.
Let me preface it with a experience I had this weekend with my wife. She had a very stressful, busy day, and we're laying in bed, and I ask her, "Are you hungry?" Because I noticed in her story she didn't eat much that day, and
Mm,
she's like, "I don't know." And that's when I
mm,
realized for my wife in this moment, she's not paying any attention to anything from the neck down. Like
mhm.
there's a disconnect, and that she's not alone. A lot of us go through life ignoring neck down. So it's a practice, I think, to learn how to listen to our body.
Yeah, for sure. And that would have described me before, like, the last 3 years. I think there is safety in being in our minds
Hmm.
and in our thoughts,
Hmm.
especially if the threat is an inner threat, like a
Hmm.
feeling that we're having, something like that. So, yes, while if we have that active response, we want to metabolize that through movement. It's not always the case that we're having the active response. Sometimes there's like a lack of energy, right?
Hmm.
And so in those cases, and even with the active response, this ability to turn inward and to notice what's happening on the inside can be useful for any kind of nervous system response. So we would think of like a grounding exercise or a centering exercise. Just this really all it is the practice of moving our attention from our outer world
Mhm.
to our inner world.
Okay.
So sometimes that can look like just feeling your feet on the
Mhm.
floor or, underneath you as you're standing. Or I really like, because I sit a lot, feeling the chair underneath me, and what I notice I do is I'll hold myself as
Mhm.
if the chair I'm like, "Oh, I don't wanna be a burden
To the
on the
chair.
chair."
Uh-huh.
Right? And so when I start to, turn back inward, I'll let go of, all of the stress or the tension really,
Uh-huh.
and, let the chair hold me up,
Mhm.
and feel, what does that feel like for the chair to hold me in this moment, or the floor, or the bed, or the couch, whatever it is that we're putting our weight on. And that actually was mind-blowing the first time I did it. I was like, "Whoa, the chair is an inanimate object, and I don't even wanna be a burden on the chair? Like, what?"
Uh-huh.
You know? So, really simple practices like that, I always think of centering is like finding the middle of you,
Mhm.
right? Which it can be physical, like you can sway from side to side and notice where the hinge point is,
Mhm.
and or from front to back, notice where the hinge point is. Or it could be more like metaphorical.
Mhm.
Like, where's the center of my identity,
Mhm.
right?
Uh-huh.
Where's the center of me? And I'm touching my chest as I do that. Like,
Right.
oftentimes it's
Uh-huh.
that heart space.
Uh-huh.
That and I would say, the theme here is slowing down,
Got it.
right? It's like we live in such a fast-paced world, and we have so much information coming at us from all different sources that we forget to slow down.
Slow down and check in. Yes.
Yes, slow down, check in, slow down and just notice. It could be noticing your environment, like,
Mhm.
I'm noticing the pink sticky notes that are taped to my wall. I'm noticing how the light shines off of the blue paint on the wall,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And then if I'm turning inward, I'm noticing that my back is a little bit tight from the middle up. I'm noticing that my mouth is a little bit dry. I've been talking a lot,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
So it can be internal noticing or external noticing, but it's really that muscle of just slowing down and notice.
Mhm.
Notice what you notice. I think this can really apply to sex too, because I don't know about anybody else, but for me, sometimes it feels like just another thing to do, another thing coming at me,
Uh-huh.
right? Which I mean, I want to have a connected, intimate relationship with my husband, but I don't always feel like I have the space and time to slow down
Uh-huh.
and notice what I notice, and to even I think the word intimacy kind of connotates for me a slowing down,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
like a softness, a connection, a genuineness,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Of maybe even a vulnerability. So I think slowing down, which is a form of movement still, noticing what you notice, whether that be to meet yourself, to center or ground, or to meet a stress response.
Mhm.
Like, honestly, sex could be a really great way to meet a stress response.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I can.
Right?
Uh-huh.
I can hear people out there going, "Oh, that feels so shallow," or, something like that, but I just think that if that is what is called for in the moment and that's what's available to us, then why not?
See, that's the 4th F, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, obviously, with both partners consenting.
Yes, consent's so important. We often think, "Oh, I'm married, so it's always consensual," but it's the, "Can I touch your hair? Can I put my hand on your breast? Or can I touch your back?" Or whatever. We need to be in good communication. It's still another person's body, and that's what helps establish safety in it. I went to the
Yes.
dentist the other day, and the hygienist, before she'd make a move, or like she'd tell me first what she's about to do. Like, okay, I'm going to use this tool and put in this part of your mouth, or okay, I'm going to use this next tool and I'm going to do that. Like, and I just couldn't. I thought that was such a great metaphor for like consent, even in sex. I'm about to do this, or I'm about to do that, and
Mm.
then you know what's coming. It helps at least a person in the dental chair calm down through the experience.
Yeah. Well, and what occurs to me is in order to do that, you do have to slow down.
Hmm.
You have to be like, I'm thinking about what my next move is, and then I'm going to tell you.
Hmm.
Right. So there's an inherent slowness to that consent.
Uh huh.
And I agree. I think, at least speaking for myself, I don't often think like I need to consent to what my husband is doing or, but I do think that it goes very far to create a space of safety and not just safety, but like what came up for me was like a bodily conversation,
Uh huh.
right? Like a back and forth that's not just going through the motions. This is what we usually do. This is what you usually feels good for you, feels good for
Hmm.
me, right? It's just like because every body is different from moment to moment, from day to day. So to kind of be checking in and slowing down on that level, I
Hmm.
think is so beautiful. And the other thing that comes up for me is it can be vulnerable,
Yes.
right? It can feel like, well, why are you doing that? Let's just do what usually works,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
And I think it requires both partners to kind of be on board, to have a certain level of togetherness from the get-go,
Hmm.
to even have that kind of sexual relationship. So, yeah, I'm just thinking of it both from like a nervous system point of view and a relational point of view and how beneficial it is from both of those sides.
When I think about my most peak, my favorite, most memorable sexual experiences, I was very present in the moment, and my wife was also. Can you talk
Yeah.
more about how we can be more present in sex?
Yeah, I mean, so little secret here that I didn't mention earlier, but I started out as a sex coach.
Hmm.
And so I've done quite a bit of like thinking and pondering and researching and learning about this. And for me, it kind of always comes back to that presence,
Hmm.
that ability to be present. And personally, the thing that takes me away from being present is being in my thoughts,
Mm.
right?
Gotcha.
Like thinking about, oh, I never cleaned up dinner. Okay, after this, I need to go do that, right? And that just erodes that intimate relationship. So it's kind of what we've been talking about this whole interview is the ability to stay present comes very much from the ability to stay with your body,
Hmm.
right? Or
Uh-huh.
in the case of sex, with your spouse's body.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Now, I am a very kind of introverted person. So, not that I've never been able to stay with my spouse's body, but that's not usually my concern.
Uh-huh.
My concern or my distraction usually comes from myself.
Uh-huh.
And so what I notice is like almost as like a meditative practice
Hmm.
to stay present in that moment is like whenever the thoughts come in, I'm just like, nope, we're not doing that right now.
Uh-huh.
Stay here. And what really helps me is just like, okay, what am I feeling right now?
Right.
Even to myself, right? I don't necessarily have to speak that out loud, but it just helps me stay grounded in the moment and being here with what's happening here,
Hmm.
right?
Do you have a
Yeah,
black belt sex tip along those
I do.
lines?
I do. So, my tip would be to narrate your experience. And I'm particularly thinking about what you are feeling on the inside
Uh-huh.
during your experience of sex. And a couple things come up for me of why this is a black belt sex tip. The first one is that it requires you to slow down.
Yes. Uh-huh.
The second is that it keeps you in the present moment. The third is that it's communicating to your partner, right? So then they get to know you and your patterns and, "Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that," right? So they're learning you. And I think it would be fantastic if it could be kind of a conversation where one partner goes first and then the next partner says something and you just kind of volley back and forth
Uh-huh.
about, speaking out loud what you are feeling.
Hmm.
The other thing that I like about this is that if you're focused on your own body, your own experience,
Hmm.
then there's no like shame or blame around it. And so I think that can also create a sense of safety. It's like, oh, I don't have to like respond to my partner or figure out what to do next. We're just speaking like, oh, I'm feeling this in this part of my body.
Mm-hmm.
And now I feel the urge to touch you here or whatever, right? We could
Right.
bring
Uh-huh.
in some of those, like, I'm going to do this next. But I was particularly thinking of just like the sensation level or the emotion level of the experience on the inside.
So this is more to the left. This is just narrating. This is what I'm doing right now. This is what I'm feeling in my body.
Yeah, it's more like, oh, now I'm feeling this. Now I'm feeling that. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes something will feel really good
Uh-huh.
and then I lose it,
Yes.
right? And then
Uh-huh.
I'm like, oh, now I can't feel hardly anything at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it would be very connecting, but also, like we talked about, these elements of safety and presence, groundedness, right? I think it kind of hits all of those
Mm-hmm.
things.
I have learned so much from you about being centered and grounded, the importance of slowing down and checking in, the how to be more present, and just the value and wisdom that our bodies provide. And it's not everything's just not cognitive. There's also our body is a fantastic instrument for us to gain more wisdom and experience, and we can use that to strengthen our marriages. If people
Yeah,
want more
absolutely.
information about what you do, where do you send them?
I send them to my website, denitabremmer.com. That's
Great.
probably the easiest place.
Yep, that'll be linked in the show notes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Please share it, along with our apps Intimately Us and Just Between Us, with your married friends. I promise they will thank you for life. If you want a more meaningful sexual and intimate connection in your marriage, I invite you to check out my Get Your Marriage On program. Over 100 couples have said this program packs tremendous value and has helped their intimacy grow to the next level. Now, go get your marriage on.